"Sir, please come with me. There's been a seating adjustment due to priority boarding." The voice was cold mechanical. The words sliced through the moment with quiet humiliation as the passengers glanced up from their phones, their eyes drifting toward the elderly man in the military cap, gripping his boarding pass with fingers that had once held rifles, radios, and fallen comrades. Frank Briner didn't argue. He gave a polite nod, lips pressing into a thin line. Slowly, deliberately, he folded the ticket, his first-class ticket, and began the long walk down the aisle. No one could have guessed that just minutes later, 10 uniformed soldiers and an enraged general would storm the tarmac to keep that plane from leaving. Frank Briner, Major, United States Army, 89 years old. Born on a small Kansas farm where the air always smelled like fresh rain and corn husks. He hadn't joined the military for medals or parades. At 18, he simply believed serving his country was the right thing to do. The Korean War taught him to follow orders. Vietnam taught him when to break them. Courage, he learned, wasn't loud. It wasn't chest-thumping speeches or dramatic last stands. It was quietly stepping forward when your knees shook, when everyone else hesitated. That courage had earned him the Silver Star for gallantry in battle. But Frank had never been one to boast. Even now, he wore plain khakis, a light blue shirt, and the same sun-faded cap stitched with the words Veteran, U.S. Army in thread worn thin. Clutched in his hand was a sealed envelope, an official invitation from the United States Congress, a special event in the Capitol honoring American veterans from every era. Frank was slated to give a speech on leadership in crisis. That first-class seat had been gifted to him by Congress itself, a small thank you for 32 years of unwavering service. But Lauren Mitchell didn't know any of that. To her, he was just another elderly man boarding late. The cabin was nearly full when Frank arrived at 5A, his assigned window seat in first class. He reached up, carefully placed his carry-on overhead, and was about to sit when a pair of voices intercepted him. "Excuse me, sir." He turned to find two airline staff standing uncomfortably close. The woman, composed and sharp in appearance, spoke again. "I'm Lauren Mitchell, lead flight attendant. This is Mr. Benson Carter, one of our supervisors. I'm afraid there's been a change." Frank blinked, confused. "Change? Yes, sir. Due to operational needs, we've reassigned your seat. You'll be moved to 47B in the economy cabin." He looked down at his ticket. "But this says 5A. "I understand, sir. But certain passengers have priority status, frequent first-class flyers. It's part of the airline's loyalty program." Frank's eyes moved across the first-class cabin, now populated with businessmen already plugged into their laptops, eyes on spreadsheets. His voice, when he spoke again, was calm but colder. "So, a man who's served his country, who's traveled here to represent veterans in Congress, has less value than someone with a corporate rewards card." Neither Lauren nor Benson responded. Frank inhaled slowly, picked up his bag again, and left the seat without another word. He walked past rows of passengers who didn't dare meet his gaze. He had survived the chaos of jungles, buried brothers in arms, and endured the worst of human cruelty. But this, the quiet shoving aside of his worth, cut differently. Seat for 7B. A cramped middle row between a teen drowning in music and a woman whose winter coat was spilling over the armrest. Frank's back, long burdened by parachutes, flak vests, and surgeries, ached almost immediately. There was no room for his legs. He adjusted, shifted again, but no position gave him peace. He glanced around. This wasn't about discomfort. It was about dignity. Lauren moved down the aisle doing final checks before takeoff. When she reached him, she avoided eye contact. "Everything all right here?" Frank nodded once. "All good, ma'am." She moved on. From his shirt pocket, Frank drew something small, a silver star, dulled but still gleaming in places. He didn't wear it on his chest anymore, but he carried it close, a symbol not of pride, but of memory, of sacrifice, of a time when his country had known his name and valued what it stood for. Now, he felt like a ghost in the land he'd helped protect. 3 rows ahead, also in economy, Lieutenant David Briner zipped his backpack into the overhead bin. 27, sharp-eyed, and as driven as Frank had once been. He'd learned everything about service from his grandfather, what it meant to stand for something bigger than yourself. He'd seen Frank's face light up the night before, when that first-class ticket arrived, a gift, an honor, a kindness that meant a little relief for the back pain that had been with him for decades. When David saw his grandfather trudging toward the rear of the plane, he frowned. Something was wrong. That seat. Frank was supposed to be in 5A. David stood, quietly followed, and found Frank gently lowering himself into the narrow seat between strangers. His jaw tightened. Something inside him stirred. Not rage, not yet, but the beginnings of a storm. And back in the terminal, that storm had already arrived. An unplanned delay, a brief alert, a call intercepted by military command. 10 soldiers, 1 general, 1 message: this flight isn't going anywhere until you put that man back where he belongs. Clearly unsettled, the boy turned toward his grandfather. "Grandpa, what happened?" Frank looked up with a gentle smile, but something dim lingered in his eyes, something tired and old. "Change of plans, kid." "What kind of change?" David asked, frowning. "They reassigned my seat," Frank said softly. "Said it was necessary." "Operational issues." David glanced around. The hush around them was deafening. Several passengers had clearly witnessed the switch. Their averted eyes and tight lips said enough. A few rose up. A woman in uniform. Lauren stared at a clipboard, like it held the secrets of the universe. Carefully avoiding Frank's gaze, David clenched his jaw. No, Grandpa, this is unacceptable." Frank raised an eyebrow. "David, no, this is not okay." David pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a building storm of righteous anger. "Who are you calling?" Frank asked, studying him with growing curiosity. "Someone who can fix this." David murmured, scrolling through his contacts. He stopped at a name: Colonel James Harrison, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force. The phone rang. Once, twice. "Colonel Harrison's office. This is Lieutenant David Breener, Colorado National Guard. I need to speak with the colonel. It's urgent." "I'm afraid the colonel is in a meeting, Lieutenant." "May I take a?" "Tell him it's about Major Frank Breener," David interrupted, his voice tight. "Tell him he will want to take this call. Please hold." Less than 30 seconds passed before a voice came on the line, deep, seasoned, and slightly shaken. "This is Colonel Harrison. Did you say Major Frank Breener?" "Yes, sir. My grandfather." There was a pause on the line when Colonel Harrison spoke again. His voice was full of something thick and reverent. "Your grandfather is a hero, Lieutenant. At 73, James Harrison had never forgotten that face, the man who had pulled him out of the Mekong Delta under relentless fire. The memory of that young major had followed him for decades. "What can I do for him?" David laid it out clearly. The seat reassignment, the public embarrassment, the quiet humiliation, silence, heavy and cold. "What airport are you at?" Harrison asked. "Denver International, Atlantic Frontier Airlines. Flight for 147 to Washington." "Don't move," Harrison said, his voice low and absolute. The call ended. Colonel Harrison didn't hesitate. He reached for the direct line of Richard Pierce, the billionaire CEO and founder of Atlantic Frontier Airlines, a Gulf War veteran and devout patriot. Pierce had built his airline from a 2-plane outfit into one of the country's leading carriers. Richard Pierce speaking. "Richard, this is James Harrison, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force." "Colonel Harrison, what an honor. What can I do for you?" "We have a situation. One of your staff just humiliated a decorated veteran on one of your flights." "Humiliated?" Pierce asked, alarm blooming in his voice. Harrison recounted everything, every detail, every disgraceful second. Pierce's voice dropped. "My God, and this is happening now, right now. Flight for 147. There wasn't a pause. We'll fix this immediately." The moment Harrison hung up, he made another call. "General Ford." "James, what's going on?" "I've got a veteran, a Silver Star recipient, being humiliated at Denver International. I want to make a statement. How many men, your call? But I want everyone in that airport to understand one thing: if you disrespect our veterans, the armed forces respond. It'll be my honor." Ford replied. "I'm going myself." 15 minutes later, the marble floors of Denver International echoed with the unmistakable sound of discipline and steel, military boots in perfect cadence. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Phones came out. Whispers flew through the terminal like sparks. General Graham Ford, 62, solemn and radiating command, led the formation himself, flanked by 10 sharp Air Force personnel. Their uniforms were pristine. Their steps were synchronized like music. Their expressions unreadable, carved in stone. The crowd parted naturally, reverently. Children pointed. Elderly veterans stood. Parents hushed their kids. Some watched in silence. Others blinked back tears. At gate B-17. Lauren Mitchell was checking the final passenger list when she heard the sound and approaching. Storm of honor and history. Her eyes widened, her hands froze, and her clipboard slipped an inch lower as the thunder of respect rolled closer. Asterisk, asterisk, the sound of boots echoed through the terminal. Lauren looked up and instantly went pale. "Who's in charge of the crew on this flight?" General Ford's commanding voice boomed across the gate area. Lauren instinctively stepped forward. "I'm the lead flight attendant. Where's Major Frank Breener?" "He's already boarded, sir," she replied, her voice faltering. "What seat?" Lauren hesitated, throat tightening. She already knew how bad it would sound. "For 7B economy." General Ford closed his eyes briefly. When they reopened, the fire behind them made Lauren take an involuntary step back. And where was he supposed to sit? 5A. First class. If his ticket was for first class. The general said, each word slow and deliberate. "Why is he not in that seat?" Lauren tried to explain about updated loyalty policies, changes in internal procedures, something about overbooked priorities, but the words collapsed into one another. Flimsy and unconvincing, the general raised his hand and cut her off with a crisp motion. "I didn't ask for your policy manual. I asked why a decorated veteran with a silver star isn't being shown the respect he's earned." He turned to the soldiers behind him. "Let's fix this. Now." Inside the aircraft, passengers stirred, confused by the presence of military uniforms approaching the fuselage. Some reached for their phones, sensing something out of the ordinary. A few turned their heads toward the windows, catching glimpses of the small formation marching toward the plane. Frank, pressed tightly into the middle seat of row 47, had no view of the commotion outside. He sat quietly, unaware, his broad shoulders hunched forward, knees jammed against the seat in front of him, a few rows up. David, his grandson, peeked over the seat back when he spotted the approaching military officers. A knowing smile crossed his face. General Ford entered the cabin first. His presence filled the narrow aisle with authority. The murmurs ceased. Conversation died away. Every head turned toward him. "Where's Major Frank Breener?" His voice cut through the silence like steel. Frank, confused and cautious, slowly raised his hand. General Ford strode directly to row 47. He paused in front of the seat and looked down. When his eyes fell on Frank crammed between two travelers, something shifted in his face. His jaw tightened. "Major Breener." "Yes, sir." The two soldiers flanking the general snapped to attention and saluted. For a beat, the only sound was the steady hum of the engines. "Major," Ford said, "I'm General Graham Ford of the United States Air Force. On behalf of the armed forces, I want to apologize for how you've been treated here today." Frank blinked, stunned. That's not necessary, General." "It absolutely is, Major." Ford extended his arm. "Would you walk with me, sir?" Frank shifted in his seat and stood. His back ached as it straightened after too long in that tight space. The general offered a steadying hand, which Frank accepted. They moved together down the aisle, side by side. Every passenger watched in silence, eyes following the pair with a mixture of awe and shame. General Ford stopped just beside seat 5AHE, turned to the passengers in first class. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man before you is a decorated veteran of the United States Armed Forces. He was awarded the Silver Star for acts of bravery in enemy territory, acts that saved American lives. Today, he was denied the respect owed to him." He turned back to Frank, gesturing to the seat. "Your seat, Major." Frank lowered himself. Into 5A. The comfort was immediate, the legroom, the soft support, the dignity. He let out a quiet breath. Thank you, General. No, Major, it's the country that thanks you. Then, despite outtranking him, General Ford stood at attention. He saluted. The two soldiers did the same. Then, without another word, they turned and exited the cabin, their mission complete. From the galley, Lauren Mitchell watched with a sinking heart. She knew without being told that her career path had just changed. Permanently. The quiet that followed the military's departure was different from ordinary silence. It was heavier, more meaningful. Frank sat back in his seat. In his lap rested the official envelope from Congress. Unopened but precious, there was no trace of victory in his expression, no satisfaction in Lauren's embarrassment. Just a calm dignity in the way he carried himself now. Finally acknowledged. A man in a sleek suit, sitting across the aisle, turned slightly. Sir, I just wanted to say thank you for your service. One by one, others echoed it. A woman nodded. With reverence, a young couple offered hushed words of admiration. Even a teenager removed his headphones and gave Frank a respectful glance. Then David appeared beside him. How do you feel, Grandpa? Frank looked outside the small oval window. The military team was retreating in perfect formation, just as disciplined leaving as they had been arriving. You know, David, he said softly, for a little while, I thought maybe my country had forgotten me. He paused, but now I realize it never did. Just then, Lauren approached. Her steps were slow. Unsure, she stopped beside his seat, hands trembling slightly. Mr. Breener, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know. I had no idea who you were. Frank looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were gentle, but unwavering. Miss, he said with quiet firmness, the problem wasn't that you didn't know who I was. Newborn photos lined the cream-colored walls, serene, idyllic, all smiles and swaddled warmth. Danielle paused for a moment, her gaze lingering on the glossy brochures beneath them. Not a single face looked like hers. It was a fleeting thought, but sharp enough to sting. They stopped in front of room 3B. The nurse, brisk, tight-lipped, pushed open the door and motioned her in without a word. The doctor will be with you shortly, she said, the tone clipped, almost dismissive, and the door shut behind her before Danielle could utter a thank you. The room smelled of antiseptic masked poorly by lavender spray. The examination bed stood, stiff and pristine. A monitor blinked softly in the corner. Danielle eased herself onto the edge, adjusting her dress, smoothing invisible creases. Trying to still the nerves buzzing beneath her skin, she glanced at the wall clock again. 10:43. Ethan was late. Just a few minutes, but every tick stretched. Longer than the last, expanding with doubt. Then the door clicked open. In stepped Dr. Lindsay Halbert. The woman was elegance carved from ice. A crisp white coat, posture like a ruler, pale blonde hair sculpted into a bun without a single strand. Astray, her eyes cold, flinty gray, landed on Danielle with no warmth, no recognition, no greeting, no handshake, no smile, just silence, not the kind born of professionalism or focus, but something far colder, disdain wrapped in sterile calm. Then, with a voice as polished and poisonous as a glass shard, she spoke. So you're Danielle Carter? Danielle lifted her chin, steadying herself. Yes, good morning. I believe we're here for the Fordiskin today. Double quotes. Dr. Halbert didn't respond. Her eyes traveled down Danielle's body, not with clinical detachment, but with a slow, scathing judgment, as though measuring worth rather than health. You came alone, she said flatly, as though Danielle had arrived carrying a disease. My husband had an emergency at work. He's on his way, Danielle replied, trying to keep her voice even. A shadow of a smirk flickered at the corners of the doctor's mouth. Of course, she murmured, before turning her back, fiddling with a stack of papers with theatrical care. Her tone shifted, now sharpened, honed with deliberate cruelty. Let me guess, you're not sure who the father is, or maybe he bailed. This morning decided he'd had enough responsibility. Sounds about right. Danielle's breath caught in her throat. Excuse me? Dr. Halbert turned back slowly, her expression unreadable, but her narrowed eyes gleamed with something venomous. Let me make something very clear, Miss Carter. This isn't a public clinic. This is a premier facility for women who take motherhood seriously, for women invested in their health and their child's future, not for individuals who show up alone, looking like they rolled in from a Greyhound station. Danielle stood, her fists curling tight at her sides. I scheduled this appointment. I confirmed it. I arrived here respectfully. The doctor stepped forward, lowering her voice into a hissing whisper. You people are always respectful when you want something. Then you bring chaos, drama, accusations. Not here, not today, not in my clinic. Danielle's pulse thundered in her ears. She couldn't believe this was happening. This wasn't some online horror story. This was real, and it was her. Her voice trembled, but she held her ground. I'm leaving. I don't have to stay and be insulted. Oh, but you're not going anywhere just yet. The doctor sneered. She turned toward the door, fingers brushing the counter with sudden interest. In fact, something's missing. She tapped a small spot near the edge of the counter, eyes glinting with theatrical suspicion. My Cartier watch, platinum band. I left it here this morning. Now it's gone. Danielle froze, mouth opening, but no words came. Dr. Halbert's gaze locked onto her like a vice. Let's just say you wouldn't be the first charity case to leave with more than they came in with. She lifted her hand and snapped her fingers. Security will be here shortly. Don't make this harder than it already is. And just like that, she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, sealing Danielle in a silence that felt suffocating. Danielle stared at the tiled floor, the disbelief mingling with a rising, uncontrollable panic. She reached for her phone, but footsteps were already approaching, heavy, steady, unhurried, like a sentence being carried out. She backed away from the door, one hand moving instinctively to her belly, a shield more than a gesture. The door opened. Two security officers entered, both white, both men, one older, with a clipboard and tired eyes, the other younger, bulkier, chewing gum with slow, impassive rhythm. Their faces wore the blank detachment of people used to enforcing policies they didn't write. No greetings, no introductions. Miss Carter, the older one said, his tone as hollow as the fluorescent lights above. We've received a report of missing property. Dr. Halbert has identified you as a person of interest. You'll need to come with us. Danielle's eyes widened. I haven't taken anything. This is a mistake. We'll sort that out downstairs. The younger one interrupted, already stepping forward. She didn't move. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice shaking. I don't feel safe being escorted like this. I'd like to wait for my husband. He's on his way. You'll have your chance, the older one muttered, already turning toward the hallway. After we're done. There was no space to argue. Their bodies bracketed her walls in motion, and the choice had been made for her. She walked between them in silence, down a corridor she hadn't seen before, not meant for patients. Dimly lit, lined with staff doors and locked supply closets. The scent of bleach replaced lavender, the warmth of the waiting room forgotten. They reached an unmarked gray door. The younger officer opened it. Inside, a cramped security office awaited, dim, suffocating, barely illuminated by a flickering overhead light. A metal desk sat at the center, flanked by filing cabinets and outdated monitors broadcasting grainy footage from elsewhere in the clinic. Danielle stepped inside, the air stale, the tension worse. She was alone, accused, and carrying life inside her, surrounded by silence, suspicion, and the sharp taste of injustice thick in the air. Asterisk.